Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. E.
And that Dalton Mortimer the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man.
Today we're talking about the duality of man and history. If my voice sounds a bit funny, please forgive me. I'm feeling under the weather today.
Winter is doing what winter do. Ladies and gentlemen, winter is doing what winter do. Um, it, yeah, uh, it occurred to me last week that we spent most of the Duality of Man in America talking about the most recent midterm elections, which isn't invalid. It's just that it's not quite what we should be talking about in relation to like a men's issues show, and so I was like, why don't we do a roundup of men in history to kind of refocus everything and kind of pick up where we left off last week? And so we're doing that because here's the thing about the founding fathers that we don't get taught in our laughing failure of an educational system. The founding fathers were kind of based, um, and yes, they were a lot more edgy than our definitions of their history uh would seem. Again, failing American educational system. But whereas some people like to point out the fact that, for example, Benjamin Franklin had a thing for prostitutes or what he called low women, or that he engaged in unofficiated anatomy in his free time and dissected corpses, where some people would take that and use that as an excuse to make the founders seem less awesome or less mythical. I see that as them being more well-rounded as people and more interesting. Um, in fact, I would go so far as to say um, the founders sort of set the meter as to what defines a proper American. Um, for example, I think Benjamin Franklin might be my favorite of the founders just because he was such a a archetypical American. But you could also point out the nobility of someone like George Washington, and again, we do get a very not even a fairy tale, a Disney fairy tale version of George Washington in our laughing failure of an educational system, and then we immediately get gobsmacked by a heaping tonnage of guilt when we get into post-secondary education because the only way to make you to disabuse you of the playground version of the story you have from elementary school is to heap the tonnage of guilt upon you like nobody's business. But in actuality, um, George Washington was a very noble person, and it's not because I couldn't tell a lie, or I would never harm a fly, or I couldn't even chop down a cherry tree. It's because he did something quite unique and something I do consider to be a masculine virtue that very few in his position have ever done. That is the virtue of refusing the crown. Because stop me if you've heard
Yes,
this one before. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
just the allure of absolute power is something that's corrupted a great many people all throughout history. And the fact that he was able to avoid that and stay true to the principles upon which they had waged an entire war for was actually very impressive.
Yeah, stop me if you've heard this one before. People under an oppressive dictatorial regime, noble rebels rising up against said dictatorial regime. They successfully behead the dictator, and all is right with the world for all of 5 seconds until the noble rebels, quote unquote, decide that actually that throne looks quite nice, and I'm sure that if we create an authoritarian regime around my standards, they'll be good because the only problem was the standards that the previous regime were operating under were bad. It's not as though there's anything logically wrong with absurd dictatorial bullshit. Yeah, but no, Washington, unlike many men throughout history, and including several of his contemporaries, looking at you, Robespierre, fucking yeah. I mean, for as much as we make fun of the French for being snooty, peace-loving, snobmongers, the Reign of Terror was one of the most bloody times in human history, and those were the French who what did it. So there's that. But yeah, Washington not only personally refused the crown, he went through efforts of trying to restrain the very position of the presidency, up to and including instead of having his office referred to as Your Majesty or Your Grace or Your Excellency or Your Honor, like so many other authoritative positions of the time, he tried to limit it in a abstract sense, even by having it be called Mr. President. And Mr. was um, the most informal title you could give someone at the time. The only the only problem was he obviously wasn't um, privy to the fact that things would become increasingly more informal over the course of time, and that
Oh
Mister
God,
would
if
one day
only they could.
become very formal in and of itself.
God, if only they could see us now,
Like
they'd be
I,
so
I am,
ashamed.
I am convinced that if Washington and company knew what what was coming any more than they already did, they would literally just have the president be called bro. Because that's about as far like it that's the thing that bothers me about the modern day officials and aristocrats is they know that Washington and company their made their mark on history as informal as possible on purpose, and yet they hold to those very same times with an authoritarian official decorum focused approach rather than acknowledging the fact that the informal slang that, for example, people on YouTube and Reddit use. Hi, welcome to YouTube. We don't really do formal officialdom around here. Even though they know why what the principles behind Washington's choice to go with Mr. President instead of Your Honor, they keep to Mr. President even though the dialect of America has gotten much more informal over the course of the last few centuries. Um,
And Washington and the rest of the founding fathers, they built this system for honest men, for men of integrity, for men who genuinely stood for something and had beliefs that they thought would make the nation a better place. Now, all we have is just a parade of dishonest, greedy filth. That's
meet the new aristocrats, same as the old aristocrats, and actually, if I'm being entirely honest, and I made this point before, but the new aristocrats are actually worse than the old ones because the old aristocrats at least had some notion of meritocracy, i.e., if I'm going to act as though I have this greater this greater standing in society, it's my job to earn and to deserve that position to some degree, be it through um, education, be it through patronage of things like the arts and the sciences, be it through um, proper, like holding myself to my own standards, or of course the famous noblesse oblige, the obligations of the nobility. Um, Whereas now we have all the pomp and circumstance, all of the authority, all of the decorum, none of the meritocracy. In fact, meritocracy is a four-letter word now because we say so.
there's a quote from George Washington that I think really sums up the man quite well. I hope I shall possess firmness and virtue enough to maintain what I consider the most enviable of all titles, the character of an honest man.
Yep. based George Washington. And it's not like he refused the crown not knowing what the crown was or could do. It's not like he didn't know what authority was, because the man was the or one of the greatest generals in the entire British army before the whole colony thing went pear-shaped. And he was also like a foot taller than the average person at the time. Because George Washington was like 6'3" at a time where the average height was like 5'4". So yeah, he knew what power was. He just also knew that he shouldn't have it any more than he was absolutely strictly necessary. Which again goes back to the miracle that was the power to refuse the crown. I I may not like Washington nearly as much as I like some of the other founders, because all of the founders were pretty interesting people, if I'm being entirely honest. But he will always have a large amount of my respect for simply having the power to honestly refuse the crown and to ensure that other people in his position would also be obliged to refuse the crown as much as possible. His only mistake was, again, not foreseeing just how crafty the inheritors of his great experiment would be.
Also, I don't think that they anticipated like the bloat and like this tangled web of bureaucracy that they've built. And it started out with 13 colonies. Now we have 50 states.
Sea to shining sea and then some, yeah.
Yeah.
Although
So
to be fair, that was during Jefferson's lifetime, because Jefferson is the one that gave us the Louisiana Purchase. So
but
he at the very
still, like,
least was around when things started going bollocks.
I mean, the expansion was in his lifetime, but I think all the consolidation of one side of the continent to the other, you know, I don't think they could have foreseen like the federal government trying to put its tendrils into every state and exert this much control, because the federal government should be a lot smaller than what it currently is.
Yeah, to be fair though, for what for the resources they had at the time, which was basically like Enlightenment era humanism stroke liberalism, they were as prescient as you could reasonably expect any human being to be. Because it's not like the founders didn't have these sort of conversations. There was a whole lot of back and forth between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. There were some people who were even skeptical of the idea of a Federal Reserve, because they thought it would incentivize the government to be too entangled in business. And that's not this assumption for it apparently was very not wrong.
So, if you could return to the founding fathers, go back in time, and give them some advice about our current problems, what would be one suggestion that you would give them about how to prevent the current problems we're facing in this country?
Term limits for everyone, not just in terms of years, but in terms of the number of terms someone can serve. Because as everyone knows, because this is something that even our backwards educational system has drilled into everyone's head, everyone basically kept to Washington's, like the spirit of Washington's um, ethos right up until I believe it was Franklin Roosevelt, or was it Teddy? It was one of the Roosevelts what went for a third term. And I don't even necessarily blame Roosevelt for going for a third term, because it was necessary at the time and he was one of the most liked politicians in the country at the time, so fair enough. But the problem is we now have a situation where even though there is nominally term limits in terms of the number of years per each term, because there's not a limit to the number of terms someone can serve, we went from democratic servants of the will of the people to literally the new aristocracy that is ever so slightly worse than the old aristocracy. And given that our country, I'm proud of being American for nothing, for if nothing else, then for the fuck the aristocrats ethos that our country was founded on. I, I love. I'm an Anglophile and a Francophile, and I love a lot of different other cultures. But there is a born and bred American part of me that is just like, as much as I admire the meritocracy of the old aristocracy, the concept of an aristocracy itself can go fuck itself. And I don't think I need to justify my reasoning any further than, well, look at the current state of the world. Oh, aristocrats fuck everything up.
Yeah. The way I would do it is, well, there's a couple of things. One, I would institute an age uh, cap. Once you are more than 60 years old, you cannot hold public office.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I would do is rewrite the Second Amendment as if you're talking to a 5-year-old. Shall not be infringed ever under any circumstances. Yes, we're
Apparently
talking to
wasn't
you.
clear enough. Like they tried to be as forthright as they could, and yet it still apparently was not clear. And here's the other thing. Here's the and this is a bit of a sidebar, and I think we've already done men and guns once, and if not, we should. But here's the thing. All you people who are going, well, they obviously only knew about muskets when they wrote that, so it's unfair to hold modern guns to the same step. Bitch, they had mortars and cannons, and yes, you could personally and privately own mortars and cannons. So
You can
anything,
own gunships.
yeah, anything with a smaller caliber than a cannon, I don't want to fucking hear it. You see?
Also, here's the thing: they did have multi-shot weapons.
Yeah.
They weren't as good as the ones we have now, obviously, but they did exist.
No, yeah, but Jefferson was president during the institution of things like the Gatling gun, and I'm pretty sure one of the Madisons was still alive, or one of the Adamses was still alive when Samuel Colt revolutionized the gun industry with things like the 6-shooter and so on. So yeah, you can take that, but they only had muskets, straw man, and shove it so far up your ass that not even a cannonball would dislodge it.
Also, I would institute a basic knowledge test to vote, because I'm sure you're aware of the current state of the American education system, Dalton. A lot of people are coming out of these.
I've already mentioned it like what 5 times in this one stream alone. Yeah, our
A lot of these
education.
people are coming out of these schools functionally illiterate. They can't even freaking read, and their vote counts the same as ours for whatever reason.
Yeah, but the problem is if we did that in today's day and age, the people who would be deciding what counts as basic knowledge would be the people who are the problem, because it would be at in a similar manner as, and we've talked about this before on the show. You know how apparently any sort of self-worth or ambition or independent spirit counts as grandiose narcissism now, according to the DSM, and how toxic masculinity is considered either a symptom or a disease in and of itself within the DSM. I don't want those people to decide what counts as basic knowledge, because
Well, the thing is, Dalton,
I shudder at the idea of someone somewhere is going to propose The patriarchy is uncontroversial basic knowledge of our history, isn't it? Oh,
Yes,
yes, you're
well,
right. No one could possibly be sane or educated and deny the existence of the patriarchy. And then the world is plunged into 1,000 years of darkness because of literal conspiratorial gobbledygook on par with the Nazis.
yeah, well, here's the thing, Dalton. Hopefully, if we institute these reforms at the foundation of the country, those people will never rise to power in the first place.
Hopefully, but until somebody wants to give me a TARDIS, I don't. My problem with speculating on this is someone somewhere, either on the extremely tradcon right or on the extremely social justice left, is going to get this in their head, and then we're going to plunge the world into 1,000 years of darkness, either by instituting the like tradcon values of yesteryear on a federal level, or instituting the social justice narrative on a federal level, or possibly the worst, someone somewhere might get it into their head to cater to both types of moralistic fucktardery, and then the only people who aren't going to be considered sane, quote unquote, are going to be people with independent, ambitious, or grandiose personalities, i.e., the people who founded the goddamn country in the first place and the only people who were generally worth listening to. Because
Let me ask you
you can't
something.
have any sense of personal grandeur without being a narcissist, derp.
Let me
Eh,
ask you something. Do you think the 19th Amendment is a good idea?
yes. I mean, it has problems, namely that if you're going to have a 19th Amendment, you really, really, really shouldn't start treating men like, or you really, really, really should stop treating men like second class citizens because, let's face it, this is the Duality of Man in History episode, and if we're talking about the duality of man in history within the context of men's rights and men's issues, men have been treated like second class citizens since as far as history goes, and then some. Because I'm sorry, but even in the context of like folklore and mythology, it's unreasonable to ask any human man to fight a goddamn dragon. Again, in the context of like folklore and mythology. So even in our prehistory, in our folklore and our mythology, we're still like, yeah, no, the men can fight the ancient, all powerful, magically empowered lizards who breathe goddamn fire and are the size of a large farmhouse. That shouldn't be a problem at all for any man worth being called a man.
I mean,
Derp.
Dalton, you consider that we hear in all the stories the hero slays the dragon. What about all the guys who lost?
Yeah. And again, usually in the stories where the hero slays the dragon, he does so for the honor of one woman. Just one. Just a single woman is worth throwing yourself against a giant goddamn fucking lizard. And to put it in less, mythical terms, Remembrance Day was last week. Um, and how many men have been thrown into the grinder of war chanting, "For women and children"? Derp. So yeah, the only problem with the 19th Amendment, as I see it, is it should have probably come with some amendments that were for men as well, and
Well, the way I see
not.
it, if you're going to have women have the right to vote, you should have given them the same social obligations that you gave to men, or remove the social obligations for the right to vote in its entirety.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the Duality of Men and War episode before. Um, I tend to lean more on the draft is an inhumane Faustian bargain to begin with, so knock it the fuck off for everyone and make
Here's
conscription
the thing:
entirely voluntary approach.
I feel like there should be some social obligations required for the vote. It doesn't necessarily have to be the draft, but it should be something that ties you to society. Because here's the thing: men are required to sign up for selective service, the draft, but women aren't. So here's the thing: Like I've seen like a lot of women, especially recently, go support the war in Ukraine and saying that the Ukrainians should never stop fighting against the Russians. Well, here's the thing: the women of Ukraine and the children, they get to leave. It's the men that have to stay and fight and die.
Yep. Again, the like maybe if warfare and the and drafting specifically wasn't such a lopsided, literally soul destroying Faustian bargain, we'd have less wars because people would actually have to go, wait a minute, is this conflict we want to rage actually worth the X number of lives we're going to have to feed to the war machine to do it? Because
I mean,
the answer
not
is
only that,
usually no to that, in my opinion.
not only that, Dalton, but one thing also that you need to remember is that I believe it was the First World War when there were people getting drafted, and then there were some men who didn't get drafted and didn't sign up. They were given I forget what kind of flowers by women
Uh,
as a way of shaming them as cowards.
white flowers and white feathers were the two things on either side of the. I think it was the Canadians who did white feathers and the Americans who did white flowers. But it was basically a here is a sign of public of coward of like confirmed cowardice. So feel free to publicly shame and or beat the fuck out of these people for being non-men.
Yeah, we're going to shame you for not signing up to go charge a machine gun entrenchment.
Yeah, or just die in a hole, literally explode because bomb, or literally suffocate to death on mustard gas because we haven't figured out that that's far more inhumane than it should be yet.
Or get blown up. Because I'm pretty sure World War I is where tanks were introduced.
Yeah. Um, and also again even if you were completely out of the line of fire in all of the situations, which in and of itself is kind of difficult to do, but let's say you got lucky or you were very, very smart about not keeping yourself just out of the way enough to not get blown up or eviscerated or gassed or what have you. The symptoms of French living, like clubfoot
God,
and
it was ghastly.
the sheer dilapidation of because it's literally go sit in a mud hole that's like deeper than your average grave for 16 hours a day or more, and don't bathe and don't get any food that you didn't bring with you. And by the way, if anyone else sees you in there, you are target number one for a firing line. So be as deep in the mud as you can so that you don't get fucking destroyed. Oops.
Not only that, but disease ran rampant. There were rats. They actually ate the rats when they ran out of food.
Yeah,
And
battlefield
God help.
medics not exactly up to Geneva Convention standards in World War One or two, folks.
Also, God help them if it rained.
Yeah, again, you're sitting in a giant mud hole that's deeper than a grave to begin with, and then reality or then nature's just gonna be like, I'm literally going to drown you in mud because reasons, and you're gonna sit there for the aforementioned 16 to 24 hours a day. Yeah, it's staggering, folks. It's even without the actual hell that is warfare or PTSD or any of that, just existing in the trenches would have scarred you for life, usually. So yeah, and in this climate, men either had to own land and be drafted or just be drafted. Women got the vote for nothing. For we just really like you as a people, therefore you get the vote for nothing.
Also, one thing I just remembered something. One thing that I would warn the founding fathers about is have no bill or proposal put before Congress longer than 50 pages.
Yeah, the whole we're going to hide 50 bills inside one bill so that we can basically get all the freebies and or forcefully fuck over everyone in this country because we know they wouldn't sign on to this if they had the option to be informed about it. Thing is, uh,
Yeah. So yeah, I've seen, video from the floor of Congress where, they're wheeling in like these massive like spending bills. It's like two thousand
they
pages long.
literally
No
need a
reasonable
goddamn
person
world
could ever read that.
wheelbarrow for them.
Yeah, it's like you can't expect the people of the Congress to have read this thing. No one could. It's ridiculous, especially given the amount of
There is
time they were
more
given.
tree here than in your average forest, ladies and gentlemen. Like entire
I think another
forests had
thing.
to sacrifice their lives to give us this paper. It is still not enough.
Do you know about the canes in Congress?
Oy.
Do you know about those?
I do. Feel free to go ahead and explain it.
All right. So
I'm
what
not
it
as
is that
familiar as I should be, so go ahead and explain.
people in Congress will carry with them canes, and what the purpose of this is that when there's a vote up, they can push other members' buttons before they can. They will use the cane to reach over and push a button that isn't theirs to cast a vote that doesn't belong to them in Congress, effectively stealing the voice of the people in that district.
I mean, points for sheer just ingenuity on that one, but yeah, no, that's scum. That's like you do that and you should be disbarred from the entire Congress at that point. Like, do not pass go, do not collect a second even opportunity for a term. You should be in either well, no, you should be in trial to be sent to jail, but you should be at least on the fast track to said trial at that point.
The fact that nobody goes to jail for that will always fucking astonish me.
Because that would require someone to vote to outlaw it, and that would also require all the people with the canes not to put their polls on the scales, as it were. Wait, you do guys, you do know that when they say holding a poll, they don't mean literally like having a cane. They mean like assess what your constituency actually wants. like that's what it reads as to me. If someone said we need to hold a poll, and someone went, "Yes, we should," gets cane. Oh, we live in the most absurd of timelines.
Yeah. Look, I think another thing that should be banned is the fact that, I've read some interview with some Congress people that a lot of the times, most of them don't even show up for votes.
They send proxies.
They send proxies, or they just have enough for basically like a quorum.
Yeah.
Like,
Or now they just Skype in or Zoom in rather.
like there needs to be a law or something in the books that makes these people show up and do their damn jobs.
Like you are being paid quite well to do this one thing. You should really, really, really be doing this one thing you're paid an exorbitant wage to do.
They're worse than Twitter employees. Or they're worse than Twitter employees used to be.
because Chad Elon Musk. He scoured the aristocratic shire and so much better. Yeah, but if you want to look at modern day aristocrats, just look at the various A Day in the Life of ex Silicon Valley employee videos on TikTok and other sites, and there there is the smoking gun of the aristocracy, ladies and gentlemen. And
It's a problem in a country where the amount of pay somebody receives for the amount of work they do is greatly overskewed. Like that is a sign of a country that is basically about to go over the edge.
well, it's not only that that's the problem though. It's that apparently, and the like stated rationale for why these people get paid like aristocrats is because these companies consider it basically a human rights issue, and this is what they define as a healthy workplace. And I'm fine with that. Like I'm a social democrat after all, and I'm fine with increasing quality of life, especially for people who work hard. But
I
A,
disagree.
that implies the necessity of making them work hard and counterbalancing it with their benefits. And B, if this truly is what you define as the only humane way to run a workplace, then what does that say about the millions upon millions of people who work for your companies that don't get anything like those benefits? Are you is that literally Bezos and Dorsey and Zuckerberg saying, "Yeah, no, we acknowledge that what we do to 90% of our workforce is inhumane, but we're still going to do it." Like, either universalize this bullshit so that everyone who works for you can have the same benefits and also tie it to an actual workload they're so that you actually are getting an even balance for both, or stop treating the middle management like goddamn aristocrats and treating the coders, who are, by the way, the people who are doing the majority of the actual work of keeping your company afloat, like literal sweatshop labor. Because
You know,
if,
I
if
think
that
that
is what they think a workplace should be like, then surely they should be giving those benefits to the coders, not the middle managers.
well, here's the thing: these people are lazy, and not only that, but they're also spoiled. I saw a recent thread where Elon Musk said that a lot of the benefits, like the free lunches that they were getting, were going to be taken away. These people whined and moaned like freaking children. They get paid like I think the average salary for Twitter is $150,000 a year, and they're complaining about a free lunch.
I mean to be fair, they are living in Silicon Valley, and the property values there are stupid, such that someone can be making $100,000 a month and still be living in their fucking car. But but and here's the thing. I'm not even mad about the aristocratic benefits of the workforce necessarily. What I'm mad about is that the stated rationale is our people work hard, and so we give them these benefits to counterbalance it and to incentivize them to continue working hard. And if that is the rationale, I'm fine with it. But that means those benefits should be going to the people who do the most work, which is the coders, and the most necessary work, which is the coders. And the middle managers should be living in the basement in relative squalor. That would be a sane system. If, after 50 hours of coding binge, the coders got treated like kings, I could understand that. I can't understand the people who do the actual work being put in subterranean rabbit cages, basically, and forced to code for 50 hours. Meanwhile, the middle managers and the HR ladies get treated like aristocrats. That's not the right way around, you see. But we're gonna have to do Duality of Men and the Aristocracy one of these times, specifically just talk about that. But yeah. Also, 90% of the people who are put in the coding benches are men, by the way, and 90% of the people who are being treated like the aristocrats in the middle management are women, specifically young, affluent millennial women, um, of a certain persuasion, because there's no way in hell Allison Tiemann or Karen Strawn is getting treated like that. But I have the strangest feeling that if Anita Sarkeesian went to Twitter HQ, okay, maybe not now because Elon, but prior to Elon, she would have gotten a literal red carpet on par with the actors at the Oscars. And I don't think anyone can tell me I'm wrong on that.
I think one thing that the really needs to be rewritten in the Constitution is the protection of property rights. Because think about it, somebody can save up, buy a house, buy some land, work their whole lives to like pay it off so they actually own it, and still if they don't pay the taxes on it, the government can come and seize it from them. Like at that point, it's not owning it; it's rent.
Yeah. You're leasing it from the government at that point. Also, um, this whole thing of like property isn't important as lives. I refute that because the thing is, people spend their lives and put in energy and effort and time to get nice things. Therefore, categorically, at least within the context of that transaction, to some extent, their property is worth more to them than their lives. So to try and flip that and say, because of abstract humanitarian bullshit, we can take all the things that make your life worth living from you, as long as we don't kill you or harm you in any way. And it's like, no, if I literally sell a portion of my soul to obtain this nice thing, it clearly is an extension of my life, and therefore to harm it is to harm me, but never the fuck mind.
Yeah, if they could have been working their entire lives to save something up, not for themselves, but in order to like say pass it on to their children, and then something comes and tries to take it
Yeah,
away. Like
society grows great in it when old men plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit is the old like Greek proverb. Um
yeah, so they work their entire lives for this thing to pass it on, and then somebody tries to come and take it from them. Like that thing is the sum total of the effort of their entire lives. How is that not worth their life?
and while we're on this subject, same goes for the people who appropriate art for sociopolitical gobbledygook reasons. For example, Tolkien's entire legacy is bound up in the Legendarium. So, I'm just gonna say it. If you follow the logic of the things people put their life into categorically makes those things more valuable than the lives, then I'm pretty sure Jeff Bezos just committed a crime that should put him somewhere in the vicinity of violating the Geneva Conventions and or the Nuremberg trials. That is the level of debate, like defacement of a legacy the Rings of Power is. And that doesn't change, by the way, if the author in question is browbeaten either by time or by actual pressure into agreeing with the changes. Cough, cough, Neil Gaiman.
I don't. I don't know what happened with Neil Gaiman.
He refuses to tell the difference between the hyper individualistic punk attitude of the 80s and 90s and the modern day social justice movement. He is one of those people that I often talk about, the people who won the last um moral war against the tradcons, but can't understand the notion that he and his ilk are in power now and therefore have to be held to the responsibility of what they do with it. I.e., they still think they're rebelling against the evil Tradcon patriarchy, which is out there somewhere, even though they won the argument back in the 90s. And good riddance, by the way, as far as I'm concerned. But when people who are genuinely aggrieved act like poor put upon rebels. That is justice. When people in power, when the dominant zeitgeist still act like put upon rebels from the center of their palace on their fucking thrones, um, that is what we call tyranny. And therein lies the difference between the um, punk loving, individualist, Daria esque people of the 90s and the Anita Sarkeesian slash Bell Hooksian approach of the current year. When people who actually need to rebel act like rebels, that's justice. When people who are uh, preaching from on high act like poor put upon rebels as they use their incalculable aristocratic powers to stifle any opposition, um, that is tyranny. And it is very important that you are self aware enough to know when you have won so that you don't act like a tyrannical dickhead. Yeah, but that's what happened to Neil Gaiman. He refuses to register the difference between his 20-year-old self who had nothing to prove or had everything to prove and everything to gain, and his current self who is an old man who can't seem to realize that he became the establishment after he won the previous argument. But oh well. I heard that Sandman is getting a season 2, and now I'm gonna have to watch my favorite comic be ruined again by the very person who made it. But that's a that's a grief for a different day.
Yeah. All right, now back to men in history. I think an important thing that the U.S. should never have done is started getting involved in foreign conflicts.
Yeah, no, it's we should, and basically everyone should, as much as possible, be non-interventionist, because especially when um they are not stable in the home front, they shouldn't be meddling in other places. Like when you're in the middle of a golden age and you feel like, meddling in someone else's stuff, that's at least, if not defensible, at least not any particular um imbalance. But when your country is currently going through an economic dystopia, like, oh, say now, um, you shouldn't be meddling in shit. You should be trying to fix your own shit first. And then once you are once again arguing from the position of a golden age, like the 80s and 90s, then we can have the conversation again. I would still not be in favor of it, but we can at least have the conversation again at that point. At this point, though, the only conversation I'm going to have with people who want to go to war again is, are you mad? Go fuck yourself, and do not come back to me until you have a solution for all the problems that we are currently facing. In that order.
Yeah, I feel like you know getting involved in foreign wars is obviously the peak of stupidity, but you know do you think that America should even, take sides in foreign conflict, like express support over one side or the other, or should we just like stay out of the entire mess entirely?
Honestly, if honestly, because we are, for all intents and purposes, the world hegemon, quote unquote, um, I would like to see us become like a neutral arbiter, because any conflict we involve ourselves in that doesn't directly involve either us or our allies is going to heavily slant the conflict one way or the other, and especially if we don't have the point of reference to actually understand the conflicts we're meddling in, which 99.9% of the time we don't have. Cough, cough, Syria, cough, cough, Ukraine. Um, all we're doing is exacerbating problems or causing new problems. I would argue we started doing that back in the 70s when we started getting involved in the Middle East, which we had no feasible reason to get involved in. Because back in the 70s, you can look at pictures of places like Iran in the 70s, and they're almost indistinguishable from America or Britain in the 70s. Um, it wasn't until America started meddling for the sake of oil, for that is the main reason they did, um, that the hyper traditionalist parts of Islam went, see what these Western pig dogs do. We need to return to the Holy Quran in order to counterbalance the world and bring about the end of days, so that the 12th Imam may rise and yada yada yada. Again, yeah, we kind of entirely screwed the pooch on that one because if we had just stayed out of the Middle East, then presumably there would have been no great call for tradition and therefore no reinstitution of things like the burqa. It's certainly not at the large scale that we currently have it. And we've already talked about how no, the burqa and the appeals for modesty aren't necessarily misogynistic. They're largely straight up misanthropic, but whatever. My point is that without the world shaking meddling of the US and other foreign powers in the Middle East, there would have been no um, desperation that the tradcons of the Muslim world could have taken advantage of, and therefore no suicide bombing, at least, or at the very least on a much smaller scale than it currently is. Which sounds pretty freaking awesome to me because, again, I would prefer a world in which the Muslims would have basically what amounted to a Protestant Reformation, preferably led by like Majid Nawaz and Imam Tawhidi, and not one in which they were still acting like it was the 6th century, but here we fucking are.
Yeah, the United States meddling in the affairs of the Middle East has led to nothing but trouble. I mean, case in point, the Afghanistan withdrawal that happened last was it? Yeah, it was last year, 2021. Yeah, we left in the most disorganized and embarrassing way possible, and now the Taliban are more, well funded and armed and organized than ever.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, we never should have even been there in the goddamn first place. And also, I'm gonna say it: if we hadn't have meddled in the Gulf Wars and with Saddam Hussein and company, 9/11 probably never would have happened, and the golden age of the 90s could have kept spinning apace. But instead, we wound up in a situation where there's almost 30 years of war, and meanwhile, the previously relatively humane Muslim world is spinning further and further and further into goddamn hyper traditionalistic theocracy and committing constant human rights abuses, which we then feel obliged to meddle in further because we don't like the human rights abuses. Never mind that if we hadn't meddled in the first place, 90 or at the very least like 60% of those human rights abuses probably wouldn't exist because they wouldn't have had the reason to default back to their dark age traditionalism.
Yeah, and to get into more recent conflicts, you know, the American involvement with supplies and information and intel to Ukraine, Russia already views itself as being at war with NATO, and considering how much support NATO is giving Ukraine, like that is a reasonable conclusion to go to.
Yeah, and I don't want to go this route, but remember what happened the last time America and Russia got into it with China standing by in the wings? Um, I and remember how much healthier America was back during the Cold War before it started? I feel compelled to point out that we're much less healthy now, and so is Russia. And so even if we win this next incoming war, it's highly possible that much like Holmes and Moriarty dragging each other off of Reichenbach Falls, America and Russia, and probably also China standing in the wings, might just get dragged down by each other, and then all of Western civilization just gets bungled beyond all reason.
Yeah,
I mean, we
I'm
can do
pretty
that if
sure
you
that
want, but I'd rather not, is all I'm saying.
I'm pretty sure back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, we had much more competent leadership as well.
I mean, before we had Reagan, now we have Biden. Just no. I don't want to live on this planet anymore. I'm pulling a fart for it. Somebody get me a fucking Elon. Build us a goddamn station.
Is it true that he couldn't attend the meeting at the G20 conference because he had to go and take a nap?
Biden, I I I don't I can neither confirm nor deny this, but it wouldn't surprise me because the man has dementia. We all like I don't want to make waves, but the man has some version or other of Alzheimer's, dementia, some other age-related cognitive issue. And it's not controversial of me to say that. The man has dementia. And and I find it a bit jarring that we're in the middle of the beginnings of a recession again after only about 10 years since the last one that we never fully recovered from.
Man, our generation
And,
just got screwed, didn't it?
huh?
I said our generation just got screwed, didn't it?
Yeah. And, we're about ready to go back into Cold War II, collapsing boogaloo. And we also just got over a pandemic and the adjoining lockdowns, which basically fucked up our economy worse than the Spanish flu epidemic did in the 1900s. And also, by the way, the Spanish flu happening is one of the contributing factors to the Great Depression. And again, we're in the beginnings of yet another recession. So there's a lot of dominoes here and a lot of forces that may tip them over. And no one seems to be doing anything to reinforce those dominoes so they don't get knocked over, and in fact, they seem to be exasperating the very forces that are going to knock them over. And I have to be wondering, like, do we want 1984 because we're heading in the visit? Okay, no, we're not heading toward 1984 because the powers that be want us to live in Ready Player One instead, which I suppose
I
is
mean, we
less
almost got
bad,
19.
but.
I mean, they won't part. I mean, some of them want to do 1984. Do you remember that Ministry of Truth that they tried to pull off a few months back?
Yeah, the sad truth is it's not even going to be one dystopia. It's going to be basically a grab bag of the worst aspects of all of the dystopias, isn't it? It's going to have elements of Demolition Man, it's going to have elements of 1984, it's going to have elements of Brave New World, and it's going to have elements of Ready Player One.
Yeah, I believe I was watching Tim Pool. He called it V4 Fahrenheit Animal 1984 Man.
Yeah, that's I, and I would like to say we didn't have Fahrenheit 51 to worry about, but here's the thing. Books are a lot easier to ban when everything is digital because then you can just lose the file of any books you don't like.
Not just that, Dalton, but considering that a lot of people are worrying about an oncoming food crisis, we might have to throw in Soylent Green in there as well.
It's just Mad Max and I'm gonna say this because I know at some point my friend Nick is gonna watch this, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. He used to really love the Fallout series because of how well researched and how prescient and how like logically thought out the scenario of Fallout was. And the closer we get to the future, the more and more he really doesn't like playing Fallout anymore because that very same prescience is now making Fallout not fun to play.
Well, I hope you got his Vulcanist power armor ready.
And then of course, meanwhile, you've got the cultist of Zinch and Slanesh in the form of the SJWs going, we want to bring about a hedonistic apocalypse of doom. And you've got the Tradcons, who are basically the acolytes of Nurgle and Khorne, doing their
Why
thing
Nurgle?
because love of old and decrepit. But
I don't
that's
know. I
the
think
really
Nurgle
funny.
could go on the atheist side. Have you seen some of these people? They're disgusting.
I mean, okay, but the reason I itemize it like that is it's very funny to me that for as much as the SJWs are like the ideal servants of Slanesh or Zinch, they hate Khorne. Khorne is the like toxic masculinity deity. And they also hate Nurgle, at least nominally, because he is literally the old geriatric white man deity. So you've got the SJWs being dyed in the wool cultists of Zinch and Slanesh, and you've got the Tradcons trending towards Cornian and Nurgalian tendencies. So it's not even that there is no Imperium of Man in this situation. There is only two kinds of chaos worshippers opposed to one another. That's how fucked we are.
I mean, unfortunately, this country was made by men who, at the time and with the knowledge they had, did their absolute best. Unfortunately, the people who succeeded them did not understand the value of what they had.
Undid their best, basically. Yeah. Also, again, to be fair to the founders, the only problem they had was they didn't go nearly far enough. Like Razor Fist has made several videos on how we need to continue in the trend that the founders set us on and strengthen the electoral college, and I entirely agree with that. And I myself have proposed the idea of there needs to be a term limit, not just in the terms themselves, but in the number of terms you can serve, and that I think is also a good idea. So, like, the
My
only
idea
problem with
is
the
to make
founders is they didn't go far enough, and
my my idea would be that I talked about having a civil responsibility for the right to vote.
mhm.
Instead of making it the draft, make it a draft. Make the draft for Congress.
Or do it like a lottery, basically.
It's like you. It's like you get a letter for jury duty. You have been selected to serve in the United States Congress for like one term. You do your time. You're out.
Yeah. My again, getting back to my friend Nick, because my friend Nick and I have these conversations all the fucking time. My friend Nick took this idea the one step further and literally added a sort of Damocles option whereby if the politician doesn't do well enough, they wind up um uh losing more than just their term, shall we say? Because we are, after all, on YouTube and we don't want to use a certain F word, because if we use a certain F word, then not only is YouTube going to piss the bed, but everyone who hates us is going to have a field day. But I have a friend who is more inclined toward a certain F word as long as he's the one who gets to decide how that certain F word will function. Um, but yeah, he agrees with you. He just thinks that there should be a deadly option in the case of someone who isn't good at being a politician. I don't agree with him, but it seems like that would be the ultimate that would be the ultimate way of dealing with this. Or instead of having a death row um in terms of execution, what if we forced like death row inmates to be politicians, and then if they fucked up, then we could Damocles them
Well,
without much
I
ethical
can
qualms.
literally say they could not possibly do worse.
it reminds me of a quote from I'm not sure if it was in the novel, but I know it was in the movie Red Dragon, where Hannibal is talking to Will Graham and he says, "Any rational society would either kill me or put me to some use." And I can't help but think to myself, given that given that politicians are like 90% psychopaths and or so like they're on the cluster B spectrum anyway, why don't we just put death row inmates as politicians? And then when they fuck up, we can execute them.
Maybe. I also think that we should try to strip away a lot of the powers from the executive branch of the federal government permanently, like shrink it and then never allow it to expand to this ridiculous size ever again.
Yeah, but unfortunately, because of how everything in the modern like all the governments are interconnected, you'd have to do that on a planetary scale for it to actually function properly. Like every government would have to be reduced accordingly. Um, and even then, I'm not sure you could sustain a first world like quality of life by doing so.
You expand the powers of the individual states, but you shrink the federal.
Uh, even then, I because the problem is no state has the necessary like budget to do the things that like a first world government needs to do, and we know this because every time a state does try to like isolate itself and do it, it does like its bureaucracy functions better, but its resources are minimalized.
The federal government could support the state, but it wouldn't be spearheading the
It wouldn't overwrite the state.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, but again, it's one of those things of you'd have to do this on a planetary scale for it to actually function because otherwise you're just going to have one sane country in a whole sea of insane countries, and the insane countries are going to insist that the sane country plays the reindeer games, or they're not going to have business with him.
Which is why I have a third suggestion, which I can't say on YouTube.
Again, like I say, my friend Nick is a little bit more nihilistic than me, and he often, when we get to this point in the conversation, he often uses a certain F word, which I usually argue against. But he of course adds the proviso of yeah, but I would only trust me to make such a system work. And my response is usually, well, that's literally what every person of a certain F-worded persuasion ever thought in history.
See, my idea would be to basically, the device that was invented in World War II.
Um, you're gonna have to narrow it down. There were
You
a
know
lot
the
of those.
one, the big one.
Ah, ah,
Well, my
well,
idea would be to use aforementioned device on the majority of countries who were against us directly after World War II, before they had their own said devices, and then just beat them into submission while we have the power to do so without fear of reprisal with devices of their own.
I okay, but again, this would require a TARDIS, and it would also um irradiate nature, and that wouldn't. The problem with aforementioned device is it has lasting consequences that are not within human control. Um,
True.
Like I'm not a big believer in like man-made climate change, as you know, but one way we definitely could do so is by by means of the aftershock of aforementioned devices.
Yeah, true. It probably wouldn't work.
Plus, I again, I really don't feel like giving uh 40 to 60% of the entire world cancer. Because that, like, at that point, I start to go, are we the baddies? Because any sane, any allegedly sane person that thinks nuke everything is a viable option is someone who I don't think is reasonable to call sane anymore.
Hey, I never once said the word nuke.
No, no, to be fair, you didn't. To be fair, you didn't. You could be talking about any certain device that altered the like socio-political landscape indefinitely, that was created at the end of World War II. But
Could be talking about the Enigma machine for all you know.
I sort of have my doubts. Press X to doubt strenuously on that one.
You know I'm joking, right?
I know, but at the same time, I don't think Susan is going to know. And gulp.
But anyway, I would have one thing I definitely would have done is warned, if not the founders, and definitely some of our later leaders to take the threat of communism very seriously.
Well, okay. If, ideally, if you warned them enough early enough, you could just prevent like the proliferation of Marx's original ideas to begin. But the problem there is that, and I know I return to this well a bit too often, but Marx's only innovation was to take Hegel's historical dichotomy and apply it to economics. So honestly, you'd literally have to assassinate Hegel and possibly also Rousseau to really like get rid of these ideas. And even then, I'm not sure that would actually solve the problem because it's possible these ideas might emerge like Lovecraftian horrors from the sea of human ingenuity, one way or the other. Anyway, it's kind of like if you assassinate Hitler, but you don't deal with the factors that led to the existence of Hitler in the first place, you're just going to end up with a series of Hitlers. And some of them might even be worse than Hitler because before Himmler and company saw Adolf and went, we could use this guy to do the thing we want to do. He was just an art student. And this is what happened. So imagine if they did the same thing, but with someone with a little bit more savvy to him. Bad. Very, very bad.
So, do you have anything else you want to talk about with men in history?
Um, apart from the general plea to just once again, the biggest problem with the 20th century, apart from everything Hegel barfed onto it, was that we gave as many rights and privileges as we could to women, and not only did we not extend equivalencies to men, we left all of the burdens of men in place. And given the newfound freedom that women had post 20th century, it actually made the burdens of being a man harder to deal with. I think I think the human rights or civil rights issue of the 20th century is going to be doing for men what we did for women a century ago. And I genuinely do think that if we do that, we'll find a new equilibrium because that's the biggest problem. The problem is not the old equilibrium was better than whatever new equilibrium we're going to eventually find. The problem was we got rid of the old equilibrium and we basically threw caution to the wind and didn't even bother finding a new equilibrium. But if men and women post the 21st century have equal rights and privileges again, I genuinely think that a new equilibrium can be established and that a new golden age on par with the humanist revolution, or at the very least the 90s, could happen again. But only if we spend this century giving to men the rights that we gave to women in the previous one. Either that, or we'll default back to traditionalism and we'll all be fucked for another 1,000 years by theocracy and bullshit. I'd rather not, but okay.
I think also one of the things that we need to fix is, you know, making sure that people are educated, and I mean properly educated, not this current bullshit where people are graduating while knowing absolutely nothing.
Well, yeah,
Because
we need to
an educated
prioritize
voter,
self-education is the biggest hurdle there. We need to try to finagle the education system in such a way that people enjoy learning and engaging with new information again. Because once we do that and also institute some kind of critical thinking, um, once we make learning something fun to do and interesting to engage with again, instead of making it a burdensome chore that you just repeat whatever the teacher says back to her and you're fine. I think the problem will sort itself out with regards to education, because it used to be that you were somewhat self-directed in your education, in the sense that you would prioritize the things you found engaging, and your teachers would do their best to make sure everything was at least as engaging as it could be, and therefore you had a much more highly literate, much more highly intellectual people. But if you make education something that is a burden or a chore that you'd rather not engage with, then you're only going to get the people educated who have the personal drive to want to be educated in the first place, who basically are willing to push the boulder up the mountain, as it were. Whereas most people are just going to be like, "Fuck this boulder! I'm gonna stay down here on the ground and do whatever the fuck I want to do." And that is going to be a problem for a civilization that definitely relies on sane education, which we don't have.
the thing is, an uneducated voter is by far the easiest to manipulate. The corruption in this country is it's as bad as it's ever been, and it's only going to get worse as long as people are so easily able to be manipulated by things like the media and lies that politicians spew literally on a daily basis.
But that's the rub, isn't it? It's not non-education that's the issue. As I've often said, stupidity is nowhere near as dangerous as the active misuse of intelligence. And the same goes for education. Someone who has never been educated a day in their life is at least a blank slate ready to fill that void with new ideas and ideally probably their own ideas. But someone who's actively miseducated, who clings to faulty rationales and dilapidated bureaucracies and passe frameworks or um, faulty logical constructs like they are the second goddamn coming, is so much more dangerous than someone who simply is not educated to begin with. Because
Is it
someone who's not educated to
miseducation or
begin with can at
indoctrination?
least sometimes be self-directed. Someone who's miseducated is addicted to norms like they're a drug.
Is it miseducation or indoctrination?
Well, that's the line, isn't it? And the truly fucked up part is when you get far enough into one, you kind of can't tell the difference between the other because at some point we're not even sure the indoctrinators know they're indoctrinating. They genuinely believe the shit they spew. And there's where it gets truly terrifying. When no, it, you know, for as much as people worry about the world being run by a shadowy cabal of hyper competent evil geniuses, there is something more scary than that, which is what if no one knows a damn thing of what they're doing? What if no one in the halls of power is competent enough even to be an evil genius? What if the world is not in control by anyone, even evil people, because no one has a bloody clue what they're doing? That is more terrifying, in my opinion. And that is also why I think some people prefer shadowy cabals and conspiracy theories to the idea that we're just being run by narcissistic children who have never been told no and who genuinely don't have a clue of what they're doing. But I think it's more honest to say we're being run by well intentioned idiots who genuinely don't know what they're doing wrong than it is to say we're being manipulated by shadowy cabals, because shadowy cabals of evil geniuses can at least hypothetically be reasoned with by opportunistic reasons. True believers who are just genuinely overly simple and overly devoted to their favorite meme, they disdain opportunism because they genuinely believe what they're doing is for the greater good. Someone who believes what they're doing is for the greater good is much harder to reason with than someone who is just in it for the money and the power. We'd be better off with the evil geniuses because at least they'd still be geniuses. But the idiots who are narcissistic children result in a world that is completely out of control and no one with the capacity to is even able to control it. Cue the Twilight Zone music.
Certainly feels like we're in there sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah. Submitted for your approval. A world in which being out of control is worse than being in the control of the evil. Because at least the evil might be inclined to occasionally be competent.
Okay, I'm gonna end this stream here. I think it's a good place to stop.
Yep.
Nice talking to everybody. I've been Mystery.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, everyone.